And today we've got a special episode. We're going to take this Husk I got used for $200 and turn it into a great guitar. Let's go ahead. So this guitar is a bit of a mystery. There was a post on Marketplace where someone was selling this for $200, and there wasn't much to the post. It just said project guitar, needs to be finished, $200. But I noticed right away the grain on this guitar was crazy. Like if you look at that, that is such a beautiful top. And I did a little bit more research on what kind of wood this is. I really think it's flamed walnut. So there's a couple really cool things about this guitar. When I first got it, it had a bunch of cheap parts on it, and I think that's why not a lot of people recognized how nice of a Husk this is, because it had some really kind of cringy parts on here. For example, this was the tailpiece, and then it had like a super purloined pickguard, and yeah, it just really didn't look the best with the parts that were on it. So I stripped it, and I started to notice, you know, how kind of a high quality guitar this is. I think this was made by quite a good luthier, because the parts and how it was put together is pretty impressive. So yeah, we've got the flamed walnut top, and you can see in our pickup cavities that it's a big thick top. It's not just a veneer. Like, it's actually a big thick piece of wood. You can see right there. A two-piece flamed walnut top. And then the back is mahogany. It's actually a really nice mahogany, nice and ribbony. And it's a two-piece mahogany body. It's got a really nice satin finish. It's kind of like, it looks kind of like an oil-based finish, maybe a rubbed finish. And then it's got a, take this tape, I was just using this to hold it on. It's got a custom like mahogany fitted cavity cover. And then here in the back you can see there's some kind of amateurish looking routing there. Like, the routing itself is actually nice, but it looks like they need a little bit more space to fit those potentiometers in there. So they did some drilling, which is fine. Nobody looks in the cavity anyway. But there you can see the top again on the bottom. And it's nicely routed, and this cavity plate fits in there nicely. And then it's got a three-piece mahogany neck. It's got a really cool like volute here, which is like something Gibson used to do in the 70s. It's a little different, but it works well. A volute's really good for strengthening this part of the guitar where it typically breaks. And then it's got a open book headstock, which Gibson would frown upon. But then look at this fingerboard too. It's got a super nice streaky rosewood fingerboard, and it's got some really nice inlays for the frets. Like, there's the inlays like binding and a piece of stained wood and binding again, and it looks really nice. And then on the higher frets, they get rid of the binding but still have that stained wood inlay. And the neck is bound. It's got binding. The frets look not bad at all. They seem to be nice and level and well seated. There's like no gaps on the frets at all. And if you look at our neck cavity, it's a long neck tenon. It goes all the way here. Now, I've seen this before on like some 70s guitars, so I think some people actually used to screw this joint in to help with clamping. Sometimes they remove it afterwards, but I guess you don't have to. It seems to be a pretty secure neck join. I reefed on it a little bit to see if it creaked or moved at all, and it seems to be well done. And yeah, it's got the SG carves on here. The guitar is actually nice and light too, and it kind of really gives off the vibe of like a 70s walnut colored SG. So what we're going to do today is I've got all the parts I need to get this up and running. So we're going to rewire new pickups in here, rewire all the electronics, put all the parts on. We're going to make a nut, put on the machine heads, put on a truss cover, wire it up, set it up, make sure the fretwork is all good, and then hear how it sounds. So let's go over what parts we're going to be using. Alright, here's all the parts laid out. So I've been building and fixing guitars for a whole lot of years, and as a result I've got tons of parts. Just bins and bins and boxes. And anyway, I'm going to be using all the parts I've already had for this guitar. So I'm not going to spend any money on parts. The only money I'm going to spend on this thing is the initial $200 and my time. Now all these parts are worth money, but I already had them already, so it's not costing me anything. So let's go over what we're going to be using here. So on the nut, I've got this blank bone nut that I'm going to carve a new nut out of. It's a nice big thick one, but it fits in the channel just perfectly. This channel also had a bunch of glue in there that I removed with the chisel. So it's nice and clean now, and I'm going to form a nut for this guitar. I've got some ferrules that actually fit in these holes perfectly with enough tension to push down, so that'll work perfect. And then I've got this set of Grover open gear machine heads that are really nice. I've been just kind of waiting to use them for something, and this is kind of the perfect thing to use them on. They stay in tune really, really well. I'm also going to be using my favorite Gibson pickup set, or one of them. This is the 57 Classics in zebra bobbins. Just got a 57 Classic in the neck and a 57 Classic Plus in the bridge for a little extra oomph. And I've got this blank kind of Gibson style truss cover that I think will look good on it. Black pickup rings. Now the aesthetic we're going for is kind of like a 70s Gibson look, Gibson SG. That's kind of what I'm going after, because you know it's got that brown walnut look. I think it'll really look good as sort of a 70s style SG. Got these black top hat knobs. I think most of the SGs back then came with the speed knobs, but I kind of prefer the look of these a little bit better. For the bridge, I had these old parts. So this is like a Tune-o-matic style bridge with a wire retainer. But I also had this old bridge that has the Graphtec saddles. So those are good for like reducing friction and just for tuning stability. So I think I'm going to replace the saddles on this one with these Graphtec ones, just because the hardware I have doesn't fit on the Graphtec one right now. The hardware is too big. So I'm just going to remove the saddles and put it on that one. There's our mounting hardware to the body. The previous owner, along with the crazy parts that were on here, he actually epoxy glued in these receivers into the body. So I tried to remove them and put like silver ones that would match my hardware a little bit better, but these things are in there like crazy. I used a hammer, I used a whole bunch of other methods I usually use to remove them, and they're in there good. So I'm just going to leave these in just because they fit the other hardware that I'm using, and it's going to be too big of a pain to remove, and you can't really see them at the end of the day anyway. So it also came with this pickguard, and I looked through all my parts. I don't have any of the 61 SG style pickguards. I wanted to use a black on this. So I was looking, and I figured I would have to order one, but then I noticed something. If you look at this pickguard, it's a 3-ply pickguard, and I really don't like the first ply. It's not the look I'm going after. But then I noticed it's black and white underneath there. So what I did is I pried a razor blade under that first layer and just forced it up a little bit, and then it came apart. And underneath is a black 2-ply pickguard that'll work great for what we're doing. I had no idea that you could do this. I mean, it makes sense. If you have like a 4-ply, 3-ply pickguard, it's basically just 4 layers of pickguard together, but I didn't really know that you could separate them that easily. Again, it might just be this brand of pickguard or whatever, but that's great. So I don't have to order a pickguard now. I have that covered. And then I had a 3-way switch. I'm going to replace the tip with a black tip. I'm sure I have one somewhere. And then I pulled this wiring harness out of another Les Paul, and I swapped them for some reason. I can't remember, years ago, but this is a really nice harness. It's got CTS pots, orange drop capacitors, so that's going to work nicely for our project. So now I'm just going to start putting this thing together. I'm going to check the frets with a fret rocker to make sure all the frets are nice and level. I'm going to check the relief in the neck with my notch straight edge just to make sure there's no neck issues. Then I'm going to get started on the nut and start piecing this thing together. So first step, I want to make sure there's no issues with the neck, so I'm going to go ahead and check the relief on the neck here. I can see there is a little bit of relief in the neck. There's just a little bit of a line between the notch straight edge and the fingerboard. So now I'm just going to check the truss rod to make sure it's functioning and we can close that gap. And yeah, it's a dual action truss rod on this, so it does tighten. It's a little stiff. I can hear some creaking, so that's kind of how you know it's working. Now I'm going to go ahead and check the relief again. And tightening it did close that gap. I've got a little bit more to go. So that last adjustment really did close the gap. There's no more gap between the notch straight edge and the fingerboard. So why that's important is that when I test the frets, I want to make sure that there's no relief in the neck, so it's nice and straight. So if there are uneven frets, that when I do a fret level, that it's there's no relief in the neck. Because if you do a fret level with a neck that's overbowed or underbowed, when the string tension gets on there, it's going to mess with how level the frets are, because it's going to put in relief into the neck. So you want to make sure that when you're doing fret work, that your neck is nice and straight. So now I'm going to go ahead and use a fret rocker to test the frets to see if anything's high or needs to be adjusted. Alright, so just to explain what I'm doing a little bit, when you put the fret rocker on a fret, this is like a machine perfectly level piece of steel. So if you put it between two frets and you get a rock, that's telling you that the middle fret is higher than the other two frets. When you put a string on that, it's going to buzz because it's not quite level. So what a fret level does is it takes all the high spots and it levels everything evenly, so that when you're playing, your string is sitting evenly between the frets. And this guitar in particular, when I use my fret level, if I find a high fret, I'll put a little mark with a Sharpie. So you can see how many marks are all over this fretboard. So it's got multiple high frets in a lot of different locations. So this guitar is going to require a full fret level. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. I do have a video on how to do a fret level. I'll put that link in the description. I don't want to go over the entire thing now. Basically, just quickly what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a bastard file everything nice and level, and then I'm going to go ahead, test it with the rocker again to make sure everything's level. I'm going to re-crown it with a crowning file and test again, and then I'm going to finish sand everything and then polish it so everything's nice and shiny. Alright, it took a while, but everything's level now. There's no flat spots. Check with the fret rocker all the way up and down the neck and everything's good. Now I'm going to re-crown and final sand and polish these frets. Alright, so now the frets are all crowned and sanded. I'm going to go ahead and throw it in the fret buffer and make everything super shiny and polished. Alright, so here the frets are all polished up, crowned, and the fingerboard is nice and hydrated now. I used some lemon oil, cleaned everything up, and it looks great. I really love the look of this fretboard, and the frets are just super shiny now. It's going to be easy to bend with them too because they'll be nice and smooth. So yeah, now I'm going to go ahead and get started on the nut. Alright, here's my nut bone blank. I'm not going to include all the steps for making a nut in this video. I'm going to make a new video on just how to build a nut, but that's not going to be included in this one because it's going to take way too long. Basically, I'm going to take this blank. It fits just perfectly in the slot here. I'm going to mark it where each part of the fingerboard meets the nut, and then I'm going to use my belt sander to shape it, and then I'm going to use my nut files to space this out, and then make channels for each of the strings at the right gauge. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So here's a look at the new bone nut. It fits in there quite nicely. I'm going to use a dot of wood glue just to make sure it's seated properly. But it's the perfect size, and I even polished it up a little bit too. Let's see if I can get the camera to focus. So yeah, nut's complete. Now let's move on to the machine heads and getting those installed. So normally when installing machine heads, you've got to make new screw holes, but the old machine heads that were on here, the screw holes are matching up just perfectly, so I don't need to do that. I can just go ahead and screw them in. Alright, so the tuners are in, they look good. Now next is our truss cover. So I don't, this one's not going to quite work because where the hole lines up is right where our truss cavity is, so this is going to have to be like a single hole truss cover. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sand this down a little bit so it's flat here, and it'll end up just looking like that, and then it'll rest right against the nut. And there we are. So next for the bridge, I want to swap out my saddles for these nice Graphtec self-lubricating saddles. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove the retaining wire and pop these ones out, and then replace them with these ones. Alright, there's a look at our bridge with the new saddles installed and our tailpiece. Next, I want to have a look at the pickguard. The screw holes on the pickguard were recessed for screws to fit in there nicely, and this layer doesn't have that. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a drill with an appropriate size bit and go backwards into the hole until I get that nice recession. And here's a look at our pickguard. Yeah, I'd say that black was definitely the right choice. So now I'm going to go ahead and mount my pickups and get my wires fed through. So one little problem I've discovered is that my screws for this pickup are a little bit too long to fit properly in this cavity. I'll show you what I mean. If I bottom it out, the screw still pops up a little bit. So I need to clip these screws a little bit just to give myself a little bit more room. Alright, that worked fine, so now I'm just going to mount the pickup rings to the body. Alright, we are getting there. So now I'm just going to mount the pots and the switch and begin wiring. Another issue I'm having here is my pot shafts are too large for these holes on the body. So I'm going to have to take a drill bit and widen these holes a little bit just to make these fit. So I'm just measuring the diameter of the potentiometer, and then I will find a drill bit that's just like the same size or slightly bigger, and I will increase the size of those holes. So I'm really going to try not to get any tear outs, so I'm going to drill very slowly, and I'm going to start off in reverse to kind of get it started. So I really didn't follow my own advice very well, and I slipped with the drill and I made some tear out on this hole here. But luckily I was able to find the pieces and glue them back into place really quickly. And it's going to be covered by the knob as well, so you shouldn't be able to see that at all. The other ones were nice and clean. Yeah, if you're going to be drilling holes in a finished guitar, I would go very slowly just so you don't get any tear out or any possibility of tear out, because that was almost a real big problem. With all the knobs and the poker chip and the switch on there and our output jack, again, that knob covered that little bit of tear out, but I was managed to glue it back into place and it looks pretty good. Yeah, and I really like the combination. It really has that like 70s vibe for sure. And yeah, everything's looking good. I'm finished wiring as well. Let's give it a flip. And there's a look at our wiring. We used full-size CTS pots with orange drop capacitors and pretty standard Gibson style three-way switch with cloth wiring. And I tested this out and it's all wired correctly. And yeah, just another look at the neck and our machine heads. So yeah, pretty happy with the way this has turned out so far. So now I'm going to go ahead and put on the cavity cover with some screws and restring it and get this thing set up. Alright, so strung up with Ernie Ball 9s. One thing I noticed though is my nut isn't quite fine-tuned yet, so the action here is quite high. Typically, when you fret the 3rd fret, you want this string to be resting against that 1st fret almost directly on it. So I'm going to use my nut files and decrease that action. So these are my nut files. They can be expensive. Sometimes you can find them on sale on a couple sites. But they each have a number on it. The number is like the thickness that corresponds to like a string gauge. So depending on what set of strings you have on there, you can use these to on the specific nut slot. Alright, so I managed to get the action really nice and low here by filing the nuts. So you can see that when I use the 3rd fret that the string's resting just against that 1st fret. So we've got nice action there. However, the action at the 12th fret is a little bit high for my liking. And I've got this bridge decked down all the way. So likely the only way I'm going to be able to lower the action, just because of this specific neck angle on this guitar and the size of my hardware, is either to get a lower profile bridge, like a thinner bridge, or I also noticed that the saddles, the Graphtec saddles, sit pretty high, and they're a little bit taller than the ones that this bridge came with. So I think what I'm going to do, first I'm going to try to swap out the saddles back to the originals to see if that helps my action a little bit, and if that doesn't, I might need to order a lower profile bridge. But first I'm going to try swapping the saddles. So here's the difference in size of the saddles. So the metal ones definitely sit lower, but I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to make the difference that I want. So I'm also going to go ahead and machine this bridge down a little bit to make it you know, thinner. I'm going to put it on the belt sander and remove some material from the bottom, just so it's a lower profile, so I don't have to buy a new one. Alright, so I was able to remove some material, and it's quite a bit lower profile than it was before. So this combined with the lower saddles, and I think I should be able to get the action I want. So there it is, and yeah, that did make a big improvement to the action. So if we check our depth gauge at the 12th fret here, we're sitting at about a 1 millimeter at the low E, and at the high E it's between, it's about 0.75. So very nice low action, but that's the lowest it can go. I'm not sure, you could go lower than that anyway and not get buzzing, but yeah, you can go up from there but not lower. Alright, now we've got the low action. I'm going to go up and down the fingerboard just to make sure there's no buzzing or fretting out anywhere. Make sure that the fret level went perfectly and there's no trouble spots. I like to speed this part up, but if you want to hear it in real time, you can slow down your player to 25%. So yeah, very nice low action and no buzzing or fretting out anywhere. That's because of the fret level. If we had just strung this up without the fret level, this thing would have been buzzing all over the place and fretting out everywhere. But yeah, it's got a really nice setup on it now. So now that it's all finished, let's go ahead and get some specs on this thing. So weighing in at just over 8 pounds with everything, 8 pounds, 2.6 ounces. Or 3.7 kilograms. And here what our 57 Classics are reading. So the 57 Classic Plus in the bridge is reading a 7.81, and the 57 Classic in the neck is a 7.77, so it's pretty lucky. And in the middle it's a 3.89. Width at the nut is a 1.67. And at the 12th fret, a 1.99. Neck depth at the 1st fret, a 0.96, and at the 12th fret, a 1.0. It's got a bit of an interesting neck profile, so it's more like a C to start off with, but it really flattens out more into like D territory by the 12th fret, and there's a little bit of a flat spot on the top on the first part. But yeah, it's a pretty comfortable neck profile, and the neck does feel rather chunky. Feels like a big chunky kind of 50s style neck. And one last look before we plug it in. I just want to go over the condition and everything and just kind of comment on how everything turned out. I really love the look of this thing. I think it turned out really nicely. So yeah, there's a look at our headstock. There's no scratches or dings anywhere, and we put the Grover machine heads on there. And we had to take off some material from the truss cover because it didn't quite fit the normal style. So we removed some of the stuff from the truss cover there to make it a single screw. And there's a look at our bone nut. It fits very nicely, and it's well cut with low action. And yeah, the inlays are pretty cool. They look like they're stained wood with binding on the outside. And the fingerboard itself is nice and dark and streaky. And the fretwork was a little rough, but after the fret level and polish, it's quite nice now. And then here around after the 12th fret, they lose the binding on the inlays. Probably just because it was getting too small to work with, but it looks good. And then there's a look at our flamed walnut top, which is actually quite thick. And our satin finish, it looks quite nice. And I like the way that the zebra pickups kind of go with it, because they kind of accent the inlays on the fingerboard. I think it looks good. And our pick guard, which is actually, it was a 3-ply, but now it's a 2-ply because we took off a layer and recessed those screws. And our new lower profile bridge, which gives it some nice low action. And our black top hat knobs with our black knobbed 3-way switch. In the back, it's got some really nice wood grain. There's a bit of a burst to this finish, so it's like darker around the perimeter, and it looks good. And this cavity cover was well cut. It fits in there quite nicely. And yeah, it looks good. The carve on this is very similar to like a Gibson. It's pretty well done. There's a look at our heel join and our 3-piece mahogany neck. And a really cool volute. I appreciate this. It's different than what Gibson usually does, but I think it looks pretty good. And then there's a look at our replaced Grover tuners. And they're nice tuners. They keep the guitar in tune very well. Okay, we are ready to plug this thing in and see how it sounds. Okay, so ran into a bit of an issue getting this thing ready to plug in. So I was really trying to dial in the intonation, and I was just having trouble. I couldn't get it dialed in no matter where I put the position of the saddles, and they're maxed out, and I still couldn't get it intonated. Now it's relatively close, but it's about it's a little bit off, and you can definitely tell. So I went ahead and I measured between the nut and the saddles. So on a Gibson, the scale length is 24.75. The problem here is when I have it right to the middle of the nut, it's only getting to about 24.5 on the saddles. So what that tells me is that maybe the previous owner had this guitar made or bought it as a Husk, but it didn't have the you know, the anchors in for the saddle or the tailpiece, so that maybe they did themselves, or maybe it was just miscalculated by the builder. But this bridge is about 1/4 inch too far ahead, so because of that I can't intonate it properly. Now it sounds okay till about, you know, the 5th or 6th fret, and then you can really start to notice it going out of tune because it's not properly intonated. So that's pretty unfortunate, especially at this stage of the game. We were almost done, and then I realized there's kind of a big flaw with this guitar. So yeah, that stinks. Basically what I have to do is I'm going to have to remove these anchor bolts here into the guitar, which were epoxied in. I tried to do that initially, but I was having a really hard time because whoever had it before used some really hardcore glue to glue it in. So I'm going to have to remove those. I'm going to have to plug the holes. I'm going to have to remeasure, re-drill, re-anchor, and reset both the bridge and the tailpiece. So yeah, that's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I've done this before, and usually after the fact I can match the wood grain pretty well with some darker plugs. I'll see if I got some walnut lying around in my shop, and then we can re-drill, plug these, and then kind of match the finish so they're pretty much invisible, or try to be as less visible as possible, and then kind of reset where these are so we can intonate it better. I thought I might be able to get away with like a harmonica style bridge like the old 70s Gibsons used to have, but I measured the dimensions and it wouldn't fit quite here. It would bump into this pickup cover. And another thing I noticed is, look at how this bridge is spaced from the pickup. So every time I looked at it, it kind of looked weird to me in some way, but I couldn't put my finger on it. But if you compare it to my Les Paul or my other Husk, the angle should be flipped. And what I mean by that is the treble side should be closer to the pickup and the bass side should be further away, like on the Les Paul or the SG here. This has the opposite, so the bass side is pushed up too close to the pickup, and the treble side is further away. So anyway I look at it, I'm going to have to go ahead and plug these holes and re-drill these bridge posts. So I will do another video where I do that. I'm going to go ahead and make another part 2 video where we go ahead and correct this little problem. So yeah, it's too bad, but yeah, let's go ahead and plug it in and see how it sounds at the moment. So I don't have any strap locks installed on this guitar, but you can tell it's not neck divey at all. It stays right where it wants to. And I'm plugged into my 1965 Fender Bassman. And we're just going to go through the tones. I'm going to stick up here into the nut because the further I get away, the more it's going to sound out because of the intonation issue, but we can get an idea what it's going to sound like. So it actually sounds really nice clean. I really like these pickups, and well, they sound really good on this guitar. Nice and clear and lots of tone and sustain. The problem is the further you go up the neck, the more it sounds out because of the intonation issue. So I'll show you what I mean. So I sound nice and in tune there, but if I go up past the 12 here, sounds way out of tune, even though I'm in tune. So yeah, that's the problem. Alright, so one of my final thoughts on this $200 Husk that I put parts back onto and made back into a guitar. As far as quality goes, on the materials and the woods and the craftsmanship, it's really, really nice. Like, all this inlay work looks great. The rosewood is super streaky and great looking. The 3-piece mahogany neck was well constructed. I really like the volute. I really like the finish on it. It's kind of this like glossy kind of a satin finish. Kind of like an oil stain finish or something. It looks really good. I love the flamed walnut top. And I just really like the way this guitar ended up looking. It looks like a vintage like 70s kind of a Gibson SG style. I think it looks really classy with the blacks and the zebra pickups. And it's just a great looking guitar. It needed some fret work. But it plays great now. Like, the action is super low. We had to lower the profile of the bridge a little bit to make the action where I wanted it to be. But once I got a full setup done on this guitar, with the nut, the new nut on there, and the filing and everything else like that, it plays great. And it sounds great too. These are my favorite pickup set from Gibson, the 57 Classics. The 57 Plus in the bridge just gives it a little extra power in the bridge position. And yeah, it sounded great plugged in. It's nice and resonant. You could feel the guitar vibrating when you played it. And it had a great sustain and great tone too. I also really like the fact that we made a guitar of this caliber out of basically $200 in spare parts I had laying around. Now granted, the parts that I had would cost quite a bit of money if you were to buy them new. And I happened to have them laying around, so it was $200 plus parts for me. If you were going to do this from scratch and had to buy all the parts, it would be significantly more. But the only bummer about this guitar is the intonation. As you can see, the bridge was installed wrong. Someone drilled the holes in the wrong position. So the next step for this guitar is I'm going to be removing the bridge posts, getting them out of the body, and then plugging them, color matching the guitar to make it as least visible as possible that we've done work to it, and then moving those holes, re-drilling, and resetting up the bridge and the tailpiece. So please stay tuned for that video. That's going to be coming soon. But that's going to be it for today. Thank you for tuning into Beckler Guitars and Repair, and I'll have more for you really soon. Keep an eye out for this next video. Thanks a lot.